The stars shimmered like distant lanterns in the vast darkness of space. The human outpost, Fort Vanguard, floated silently in the emptiness, a lone guardian at the edge of known space. It was a massive station, equipped with advanced sensors, powerful defense systems, and a dedicated crew of soldiers, engineers, and officers. For months, there had been peace. No threats, no alarms, just the quiet hum of machinery and the slow passage of time. But that night, everything changed. Inside the command center, a young officer named Lieutenant Mark Dawson stared at his screen. His fingers hovered over the control panel as his heart pounded in his chest. The radar had detected something big. His screen showed an unidentified warship moving fast, heading straight toward Fort Vanguard. "Commander Carter," Mark called out, his voice tense. Commander Raina Carter, a battle-hardened leader with years of experience, turned from her desk. Her sharp eyes locked onto the screen. She walked over quickly, her boots clicking against the metal floor. When she saw the data, her expression darkened. "Are we sure about this?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Mark nodded. "Yes, ma'am. It's an unknown warship. No response to hails. Moving at attack speed." A deep silence filled the room. The other officers stopped what they were doing and turned their attention to the screen. They all knew what this meant. An unidentified warship appearing in human territory, especially one ignoring all communications, was never a good sign. Commander Carter took a deep breath, raised the station's alert level to code red. "Activate all defense systems. I want our warships ready for battle." The alarms blared through the outpost, a loud and urgent sound. Red lights flashed across the hallways as soldiers ran to their positions. Pilots strapped into their fighter ships. Engineers powered up the station's energy shields, and gunners took their places at the battle stations. The peaceful silence of Fort Vanguard had been replaced with the sounds of preparation for war. A silent threat. As the enemy warship moved closer, its details became clearer. It was massive, easily 3 times the size of a human battleship. Its dark, metallic hull seemed to absorb light, making it look like a shadow gliding through space. Strange symbols covered its surface, glowing with an eerie blue light. The AI system scanned the warship and displayed the results on the command center's main screen. Identified XELNAR warship. Class: Destroyer. Status: Hostile. The room fell silent. The Selnar Empire, a race of brutal conquerors known for wiping out civilizations without mercy. They had never openly attacked humanity before, but there were rumors, whispers of their deadly strength. Now, those whispers had become reality. "We need reinforcements," said Captain Elias Grant, the station's second-in-command. "We can't take on a Selnar destroyer alone." Carter shook her head. "Reinforcements are hours away. We don't have that kind of time." She turned to the communications officer. "Send a distress signal to the nearest fleet, but we hold the line until then." The officer nodded and began transmitting the call for help. But deep down, everyone knew that by the time help arrived, the battle would already be decided. Preparing for battle. The Selnar ship stopped just outside the firing range of Fort Vanguard. It was close enough to be a threat, but not close enough to attack. A cold, calculating move. They were watching, studying, waiting. "What are they doing?" Mark muttered, watching the screen. Commander Carter narrowed her eyes. "They're testing us, seeing if we'll attack first." For minutes, the two forces stared at each other across the empty void of space. The Selnar ship made no attempt to communicate. No threats, no demands, just silence. Then, without warning, the enemy ship powered up its weapons. A bright red glow formed along the sides of the ship as its plasma cannons charged. "Enemy ship is locking onto us," an officer shouted. Carter didn't hesitate. "Shields to maximum. Battle stations. Now." The soldiers braced themselves. The pilots gripped their controls. The gunners aimed their weapons at the massive ship. Everyone was ready. Then, the first shot was fired. A massive energy beam burst from the Selenar destroyer, cutting through the darkness like a burning sword. It struck Fort Vanguard's shields with a thunderous impact, sending shockwaves through the station. Lights flickered, and the metal walls groaned under the pressure. Shields holding at 80%. An engineer reported. Carter clenched her fists. This was just the beginning. The Selenar had made their move. Now, humanity had to respond. The battle had not yet begun in full, but the first shot had been fired. Fort Vanguard's shields absorbed the powerful blast, but the impact sent tremors through the station. Inside the command center, Commander Reyna Carter steadied herself, her hands gripping the edge of the tactical table. Status report, she barked. Shields holding at 80%. An engineer responded. No major damage, but that was just a test shot. If they fire at full power, we might not hold for long. Carter exhaled slowly, her mind racing. The Selenar Warship was a destroyer-class vessel designed for planetary sieges and large-scale battles. Fort Vanguard was strong, but it was not a warship. It was a defense outpost. If this turned into a full engagement, they would not survive without reinforcements. We need more intel on their movements, she said. Deploy recon drones. I want eyes on their weapons and shield status. Yes, Commander. A dangerous game. 2 small drones launched from the outpost, tiny dots in the vast darkness of space. They moved quickly, circling the enemy warship, scanning its structure and energy levels. On the command center screen, data began to appear. The Selenar ship had powerful shields, but they were concentrated at the front, likely expecting a head-on assault. Their weapons were still charging, but the energy readings suggested something much stronger than the first shot. They're waiting, Captain Elias Grant said, studying the screen. They're holding back their full power. Trying to intimidate us, Carter muttered. Then, something unexpected happened. The Selenar ship stopped moving. Its engines powered down to idle mode. The glowing blue markings on its hull dimmed slightly. For a moment, it seemed as if the warship had lost interest in the fight. Why did they stop? Mark Dawson asked, confused. Carter's eyes narrowed. They're not retreating. They're observing. The calm before the storm. Minutes passed. Neither side moved. The Selenar ship remained still, silent. Fort Vanguard held its position, ready but waiting. The tension in the command center was thick, pressing down on everyone like a heavy weight. Commander, the communications officer spoke up. Still no response from the Selenar. They refuse all hails. Keep trying, Carter ordered, though she doubted it would make a difference. The Selenar were known for their ruthlessness. They didn't negotiate. They conquered. Suddenly, the radar officer's voice broke the silence. New readings, multiple energy spikes detected inside the enemy ship. Carter turned sharply. Are they preparing to fire? The officer hesitated. No, it's something else. It looks like movement. On the main screen, the drones detected strange activity inside the Selenar vessel. Sections of the ship were shifting. Energy signatures were changing. It was as if the ship was reconfiguring itself. And then, without warning, the Selenar vanished. Vanishing act. Alarms blared across Fort Vanguard. The radar, which had just been tracking the massive warship, now showed nothing. The Selenar had disappeared from all scans. Where did they go? Captain Grant demanded. The radar officer frantically checked the systems. I don't know. They were just there. That's impossible, Carter said, her eyes locked on the empty space where the warship had been. No ship that size can just vanish. Mark, still monitoring the drones, gasped. Commander, the drones are still detecting them, but only visually. Our sensors can't pick them up. Carter's stomach dropped. Stealth technology. The Selenar hadn't retreated. They had cloaked their ship from human scanners. But why? What were they planning? Then a new alert flashed on the screen. Incoming transmission. HFY Warship. Everyone froze. The Excelnar had finally decided to speak. Carter took a deep breath. Put it through. A deep, guttural voice filled the command center. It was rough, alien, but clear. Humans, you are not prepared for what is coming. And then, just as suddenly as they had spoken, the transmission cut off. For the first time that night, a chill ran down Carter's spine. The Excelnar weren't just here for a battle. They were testing humanity. And whatever came next would be far worse. The Excelnar's message echoed in the minds of everyone in the command center. You are not prepared for what is coming. The silence that followed was heavier than before. The enemy warship was still invisible to sensors, but the human drones could still see it, floating like a silent predator in the dark. Commander Reyna Carter gritted her teeth. This was a game of fear, and she refused to let humanity be intimidated. Then, without warning, the Excelnar warship reappeared on the radar. The cloaking system shut down, and within seconds, its energy readings spiked. The enemy was no longer waiting. They had seen enough. Their weapons were powering up, this time at full capacity. The bright blue markings on the warship's hull pulsed violently as enormous plasma cannons extended from its sides. Inside Fort Vanguard, alarms blared as every system detected what was coming. They're charging for a full-scale attack. Lieutenant Mark Dawson shouted, "Impact in 20 seconds. Brace for impact," Carter yelled. The outpost shields were already at full power, but she knew they wouldn't hold forever. The station's gunners locked onto the enemy ship, preparing to fire. Then the first plasma blast hit. A massive bolt of energy struck the shields, shaking the entire outpost. The force of the impact sent crew members stumbling as power flickered. Another shot followed, then another. The shields absorbed the hits, but they were dropping fast. Shields at 45%. An engineer reported, panic in his voice. Carter knew they had no choice. All ships, open fire. Show them what humanity is made of. The response was immediate. Fort Vanguard's defense turrets roared to life, launching missile after missile toward the Excelnar warship. The human fleet, consisting of smaller but agile Valkyrie-class warships, swarmed the enemy, firing railguns and laser cannons. Explosions lit up the darkness as human weapons impacted the enemy's hull. But the Excelnar warship's shields were stronger than expected. Every hit only made a small dent. Meanwhile, the enemy's counterattack was ruthless. A Valkyrie-class ship, the Vanguard Spear, took a direct hit to its engines. The explosion tore through its hull, sending debris into the void. "We're losing ships," Captain Elias Grant shouted. Carter clenched her fists. They needed a new strategy. Fast. Commander Reyna Carter gripped the edge of the tactical table as another explosion rocked Fort Vanguard. The shields were down to 20%, and the Excelnar warship showed no signs of stopping. Their plasma cannons burned through space, tearing into the smaller human ships. The Vanguard Spear was already lost, and if they didn't act fast, more would follow. The enemy was stronger, faster, and better protected. A direct battle was a losing game. "We need to find a weakness," Carter said, forcing herself to stay calm. "Their shields are holding, but every defense has a limit." She turned to Lieutenant Mark Dawson, who was frantically analyzing data. "Mark, give me something." Mark's fingers flew across the controls, scanning through energy readings, battle footage, and heat signatures. Then he spotted something, a pattern. "Commander," he called out. "Their shields are strongest at the front and sides, but there's a slight fluctuation near their rear thrusters. It looks like their shields cycle power in waves. There's a moment, a small window, where one section weakens before the power shifts again." Carter's eyes lit up. "That's it. That's our way in." She turned to the fleet's communication officer. "Send a message to all ships. We focus all fire on the weak spot near the rear thrusters. We synchronize our attacks. One powerful strike while their shields cycle. The order was sent, and the human fleet adjusted its formation. The smaller Valkyrie-class ships darted around the Selenar warship, baiting its cannons while the larger human battleships lined up their weapons. The moment arrived. The Selenar shield flickered near the thrusters. "Now," Carter commanded. A wave of coordinated fire erupted from the human fleet. Missiles, laser beams, and railgun rounds all struck the same point. The Selenar shield flickered violently. Then, boom! A missile finally broke through, piercing the enemy hull. The explosion sent chunks of metal flying into space, the first real damage to the enemy ship. Inside the command center, a cheer erupted. "Direct hit," Captain Elias Grant shouted. "We cracked their shields." But Carter knew this wasn't over. The Selenar had been wounded, but a wounded beast was always more dangerous. And as the smoke cleared, the enemy warship's weapons began charging again, this time with even more power. The humans had struck first. Now, the Selenar would strike back. The first real damage to the Selenar warship had been dealt, but there was no time to celebrate. The alien vessel trembled from the impact, fire and debris spilling into space from the breach near its thrusters. Yet, instead of retreating, the Selenar ship adapted. The blue energy lines on its hull pulsed violently, and within seconds, its damaged section began to self-repair. Inside Fort Vanguard's command center, Commander Raina Carter felt her stomach tighten. "They're regenerating," she muttered. "They're learning." A sudden energy spike blared across the sensors. "Commander," Lieutenant Mark Dawson shouted, panic in his voice. "They're overcharging their main cannons. This is different from before." Carter's eyes snapped to the screen. The Selenar warship's entire front section was glowing red-hot, its plasma cannons feeding off an unstable power surge. It wasn't just another attack. It was an annihilation blast. If it hit, Fort Vanguard wouldn't survive. Impact in 30 seconds. Captain Elias Grant called out. "Our shields won't hold." Carter had seconds to act. Evasive maneuvers for all ships. "Pull back," she ordered. "Divert all station power to shields. Maximum overload." The human fleet scattered, ships breaking formation to avoid the coming blast. Inside Fort Vanguard, engineers scrambled to reroute power, funneling everything into the last defensive barrier. The station's shields flickered dangerously, but Carter knew they had no choice. This shot would either break them, or humanity itself. Then, with a deafening boom, the Selenar fired. A massive wave of plasma energy tore through space, a burning storm of destruction heading straight for Fort Vanguard. The station's overloaded shields took the hit, absorbing the full force of the attack. The entire structure shook violently. Metal groaned. Consoles sparked. Lights flickered in and out. Then, the shields failed. Alarms screamed through the outpost. "Shields are gone," an officer cried. Carter barely stayed on her feet. Smoke filled parts of the command center. The Selenar had crippled them, but they had survived the blast. Barely. But now, they were defenseless. And the enemy wasn't finished yet. Fort Vanguard was crippled. The shields were gone, the station's hull was damaged, and smoke filled the air inside the command center. Red emergency lights flickered as engineers scrambled to restore power. Outside, the human fleet was struggling. 3 more Valkyrie-class ships had been lost, and the remaining vessels were outgunned. The Selenar warship had taken a hit, but it was still stronger, still more powerful. And now, with the station's defenses down, they'd moved in for the kill. Commander Raina Carter wiped the blood from a small cut on her forehead. She had been thrown against the console when the shields failed, but she didn't have time to care about injuries. Her mind was racing. They had one last chance, one final move. If it failed, Fort Vanguard, and everyone on it, would be nothing but space debris. "We can't take another direct hit," Captain Elias Grant said, breathing heavily. "One more, and we're done." Carter's eyes flicked to the damage reports. Weapon systems were barely functioning. Most of their missiles were spent. Railguns were damaged. But then she saw it. One last weapon still operational. The EMP missile, she said. Mark Dawson's eyes widened. The experimental one. It was never tested in combat. It doesn't matter, Carter said firmly. If we don't try, we're already dead. The EMP missile was designed to disable enemy ships by overloading their systems. It wouldn't destroy that Selenar vessel, but it could shut it down, give them a chance to turn the tide. But to work, it needed to detonate at close range. That meant someone had to get dangerously close to the enemy warship. I'll go, said Commander Jace Reynolds, leader of the station's elite strike team. His small squad of fighter pilots had survived the battle so far, and they were the only ones fast enough to deliver the payload. We can get in, fire the missile, and get out. Carter hesitated for only a second, then nodded. Go, and don't miss. The mission begins. The Selenar warship was preparing for its final strike, but Jace and his team launched their fighters, speeding toward the massive alien vessel. They weaved through enemy fire, dodging plasma shots and explosions. The Selenar seemed to sense the threat. They focused their attacks on the small human fighters, trying to stop them before they could get close. One fighter was hit, then another, but Jace kept pushing forward. Almost there, he gritted through his teeth. Back at the command center, everyone held their breath as they watched the fighters approach the target. The Selenar warship was charging its cannons again. They had seconds before Fort Vanguard would be destroyed. Jace locked onto the weak spot, the same area where the first human strike had breached the shields. Missile away, he shouted. The EMP missile launched, streaking through space toward the enemy warship. The Selenar tried to intercept it, but it was too fast. The missile hit the target, and then, with a blinding flash, it detonated. A shockwave of blue energy rippled across the Selenar ship. Its glowing symbols flickered and died. Its cannons, once ready to fire, powered down. The ship stopped moving, completely paralyzed. Hope rises. Inside Fort Vanguard, a stunned silence filled the room. Then the radar officer spoke, his voice almost disbelieving. It worked. The Selenar ship is disabled. Cheers erupted. For the first time, humanity had stopped a Selenar warship in direct combat. But Carter wasn't celebrating yet. She knew what needed to happen next. Send an immediate transmission to the Selenar, she ordered. Tell them, surrender, or we finish what we started. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, the Selenar weren't in control. Humanity had turned the tide. The Selenar warship hung motionless in space, its once powerful cannons silent, its glowing blue energy lines dark. The EMP strike had worked. Their systems were shut down, leaving them completely vulnerable. For the first time in history, humanity had done the impossible. They had stopped a Selenar warship in direct combat. But now came the real test. Inside Fort Vanguard's command center, Commander Rayna Carter stood tall, her eyes locked on the enemy ship. Have they responded? She asked. The communications officer shook his head. No response yet, Commander, but they're receiving our message. Carter didn't like it. The Selenar were ruthless conquerors. They didn't believe in surrender. If they were silent, they were thinking. That made them dangerous. Captain Elias Grant leaned in. If they don't surrender, we need to finish them while we have the chance. Carter nodded. The human fleet, though battered and bruised, still had enough firepower to destroy that Selenar ship before it could reboot. But something inside her told her to wait, to see what the enemy would do next. The unexpected response. Minutes passed. The Selenar warship remained unresponsive. The tension inside the command center grew thick. Then suddenly, a new alert flashed on the screen. Incoming transmission. Selenar warship. Everyone froze. The Selenar never spoke unless they were in complete control. And yet, here they were, sending a message while disabled and vulnerable. Put it through, Carter ordered. A deep, guttural voice filled the room, but this time, it lacked the arrogance from before. "Humans, you are not as weak as we believed." Carter's jaw tightened. "You attacked our outpost. You came to destroy us. And now that we've crippled your warship, you finally want to talk." There was a pause. Then, the Selnar's voice returned. "No species has ever challenged us and survived. We have studied your kind from afar. We expected you to fall quickly. We were wrong." Carter's heart pounded. Was this respect? The Selnar had never shown respect to any race before. They were conquerors, warriors who crushed all who stood before them. But today, they had been defeated by humans, and they knew it. "What happens now?" Carter asked cautiously. A long silence followed. Then, the Selnar warship powered down its remaining systems. "We will leave. For now," the alien voice said. "But know this, human, we will return. And next time, we will be prepared." With that, the transmission cut off. Seconds later, the Selnar warship activated an emergency jump drive, vanishing into the depths of space. A new beginning. Inside Fort Vanguard, the room erupted in cheers. The battle was over. Humanity had won. Carter allowed herself a small smile, but deep inside, she knew the truth. This was only the beginning. The Selnar would return. Stronger, smarter, more dangerous than before. But now, they knew something they had never believed before. Humanity was not prey. Humanity was not weak. Humanity was ready to fight. And when the Selnar came back, Earth would be waiting.